Yeah, it's great to be back with you. I was talking with a couple of you before you all arrived, and we were thinking, like, when was the last time I was here? But the pandemic is like, I don't know, it could have been 20 years ago. I don't really know. Anyway, but it's really good to be back with you. And when Pastor Connie contacted me and asked me what I would be interested in doing, I thought immediately of a book that I wrote that came out about a year ago this time, and it's on the woman at the well, and it's called Belonging. This is the book, Belonging, 5 Ways to Unlock Your Potential as a Disciple. It's meant for lay people in their study and in their growing in faith. And so it walks through the story of the woman at the well with lots of questions and things to reflect on. Great for a small group study. You could make it 5 weeks 5 weeks, 6 weeks. But it's a great small group thing. So I've got books here, and then I'm done with my little plug. And so $20 cashier check, but that is what I wanted to do with you this time. And so I'm going to do some introduction kind of things today about the story, but then do a deep dive into the story of the woman at the well when I come back in 2 weeks. So that's the plan that we're thinking about for our time together. So today, introduction, and then on the 18th, chapter 4, 1 through 42. And so that could be one thing that you do between now and then is read the story. And then we'll go through it together. So this is the description that I provided for Pastor Connie, sitting at the well with the Samaritan woman and Jesus in John 4. We learn key characteristics of what it looks like to follow Jesus. These sessions will have us listen in on this extraordinary conversation and invite us to think in new ways about what it means to follow Jesus. And so that is our focus for this time together in thinking about, in particular, what is discipleship? What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does that look like? What does this story help us see that maybe we hadn't thought about before, and maybe it just didn't appear that this was something that I could do to follow Jesus. So that is what we're up to. But in order to get there eventually, we need to set up a couple of themes and a couple of aspects about the Gospel of John that will really help us to get a sense of what this story is about. And the first thing is to think about the idea of witness, of being a witness for Jesus. And because what we'll see in the woman at the well is that she is really the first witness besides John the Baptist, who points to Jesus, who testifies to her encounter with Jesus. And it's one of actually the characteristics of being a disciple, at least according to John. And so when we think about what does it mean to follow Jesus, one of the things that John invites us to imagine is what does it mean to witness to Jesus? What does it mean to testify? What does it mean to point to Jesus and to talk about our faith and to talk about what we believe in Jesus? And so this really is a major theme in this gospel that comes through John, and I like to call him not the Baptist. Because in the Gospel of John, his primary role is not to baptize Jesus. In fact, he does not baptize Jesus in the Gospel of John. He witnesses the baptism of Jesus. He watches the baptism of Jesus, the Spirit coming out of the heavens and landing on Jesus. And so he talks about that experience. He gives witness to that experience. And so he's introduced in the Gospel of John very early on in chapter 1, where we have this 18 verses, what's called the prologue in the Gospel of John. And this introduction of John, not the Baptist, is focused on his role as this witness or who testifies. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he comes to testify to the light. And right before this verse is verse 5. 5 comes before 6. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And so what we will see then later on in chapter 1 is that John will point to Jesus, and that's why this is a very famous portrait of John the Baptist. You often, in portraits of John the Baptist, seeing him pointing, even though I know your mother told you never to point. But this is what he does. He points because his first words, one of his first words are, "Look, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Look, there he is, pointing, and pointing, of course, to Jesus. So giving witness to Jesus' presence and the role of Jesus as the Lamb of God. So that is one aspect of the woman at the well that we're going to pay attention to. What does it mean to give witness? What does it mean to testify? What does that look like? What does she invite us to see about giving witness to our faith? What's interesting in the Gospel of John is that the word evangelize never occurs, because sometimes we think of giving witness or testifying to our faith as evangelism. Yes? Okay, which is sometimes not a very favorite word. That has a kind of negative connotation, doesn't it? If somebody is going to evangelize you. We have images of knocking on your front door, do you believe in Jesus? And passing out, little tracts and things like that, and asking questions, have you been saved? Those sorts of things. But the word evangelize never occurs in the Gospel of John. It is this concept of giving witness. So how can we imagine together what that looks like? Where have you done that? Could you do that? And inviting us to that aspect of discipleship that is so important for John, but for Jesus especially. Okay, so that's the first sort of theme we want to pay attention to. The next theme we want to pay attention to comes from John 1:14. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. Now, you might have a different translation of this particular verse. The Word became flesh and dwelt, right? That's probably one that you've heard before, dwelt. Eugene Peterson in The Message, he writes, the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. So they're trying to translate this word here of lived, dwelt, moved into the neighborhood. The word there is skenao. Okay, have you had enough coffee for a little Greek? Okay. Skenao, which literally means to tent or to tabernacle. And so if we translated it as close to that verb as possible, the Word became flesh and tented among us, tabernacled among us. Well, what is John doing there? What is John imagining here about who Jesus is? Well, to what extent he's recalling the promises of God in the wilderness wanderings. Remember when God's people, the Israelites, were freed from Egypt, but then they wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes a lot of times they're complaining to Moses. Why did you bring us here? We don't have anything to eat. We don't have anything to drink, But the promise in that whole story is that God tabernacles with God's people. So they had the movable ark, the tabernacle, where the Ark of the Covenant was And that was where God resided, so that God did not abandon them. God was not apart from them. God literally was with them wherever they went in the tabernacle. And so that's in part what John is saying here, that your God is now tabernacling with you once again. And this is a really serious moment, or something to think about, because to remember that the Gospels, all four of the Gospels, were written after 70 CE or AD. What happened in 70? The destruction of the temple, okay? And the razing of Jerusalem. The Romans come in, and because Palestine at that time is a Roman colony, it's a province, it's colonized by Rome. And there was a couple revolts that, kind of happened. And then the revolt of 66 to 70, where the Romans said, that's it. We're done with this. Come in and destroy the temple. Well, what difference does that make? If the temple is destroyed, this is a theological crisis. Where is God? Because God was thought to reside in the temple. That's where the ark now was. And if God is no longer in the temple, where is God? And so all four of the Gospels are answering that theological crisis. Where is God? Well, the answer is where? With us in Jesus. God is now in Jesus. God has become flesh, incarnated in Jesus. And so I point this out because what we were wanting to see when we get to the woman at the well is the question becomes, will she recognize that? Will she see? Will anyone in this gospel recognize that where is God? Standing right in front of you. God is not in a temple somewhere. God is right here with you. Not only that, but the Word, God became flesh. Notice it doesn't say the Word became man, anthropos. The Word became flesh. So now God is not only where we are, wherever we go, but God is now who we are. Fully human, entering into all that it means to be a human being. And that's one of the things that we see throughout the Gospel of John is this sense of, yes, Jesus is fully divine, fully God, but every time you say he's fully God, we're reminded of that, no, he's also fully human. And that's actually what we get at the woman at the well, because the very first thing Jesus does, he comes to the well and says, what? I need a drink. I'm thirsty. Right? I mean, we're reminded that he has needs. He's thirsty. He wants a drink, and she is going to provide that for him. So that's another theme that we want to listen for when I come back is she going to recognize who Jesus is? What difference does it make that God has come to her? And what is God providing for her in Jesus? All right, another theme that we want to listen for in the story of the woman at the well comes from John 1:16. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. That's a lot of grace, right? It's an abundance of grace, in fact. And that is also a theme that we're going to pay attention to. What does Jesus offer the woman at the well? He offers her abundant life. He's offering her abundance. He's offering her himself. The water that I will provide, it will be like gushing up. Never ending, right? Wells run dry, and you have to dig another one. But the water that I will provide is constantly flowing, gushing up, this abundant life. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly, John 10:10. And so this idea that when she meets Jesus at the well, that she is receiving this grace upon grace in that moment. What's curious in the Gospel of John is that the word grace only appears 4 times, and only in the first 18 verses. That's it. Inquiring minds want to know, why is that? Because grace, we all like the word grace, right? Everybody good? Thumbs up, especially Lutherans. We love grace, right? But then the question becomes, well, what does it mean? How do we define grace? God's love? Yeah. God's forgiveness? Yeah. God's mercy? Yes. God's protection and provision? Yes. We cannot stop defining grace, because we can't at the end really define completely what God's grace is. It's so abundant. It's so beyond what we can even imagine and articulate. So John, then, what we experience in these encounters with Jesus is grace itself. That grace is not now just this abstraction, but grace is embodied in Jesus. And so what we get in the Gospel of John, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, what we get in the Gospel of John are these experiences of abundant grace. These encounters with Jesus that provide abundant grace, so that we are invited to imagine, what does grace feel like? What does grace sound like? What does grace taste like? That donut? I did get a donut. I usually don't have donuts, but that looked really, really good. What does grace look like? Okay? And so that's, for the woman at the well, what is grace for her? What is that grace going to feel like and taste like and smell like and look like for her? And so that's another theme that we want to pay attention to. Another theme that we want to look for in this story is this idea of relationship. And that's where I get this title of the book. I wanted to call it Beloved, but somebody else has that title. So, understandably so. All good. So I called it Belonging, because what Jesus offers this woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, what Jesus offers us as a disciple is fundamentally and first a relationship of belonging, of truly belonging to Jesus, of being in this deep and intimate relationship with Jesus. And it's out of this relationship that we have all of the abundance that Jesus gives. But first and foremost, this coming of God in Jesus is this provision of a relationship, or this invitation into a relationship that is intimate, that is so close. It's hard to describe, except this is how John tries to describe it. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who makes God known. This is the last verse of the prologue, 1:18, and it really is a summary of, okay, no one has ever seen God because you die. That's what happens. But it is God coming as this only Son, or as this begotten God, this Word made flesh, who himself is close to the Father's heart, who himself has this intimate relationship with God into which we are invited. Now, the word here is close to the Father's heart is, how do I put this? Wrong. Because the word there is not heart, cardia. That's where we get cardiology. Perfectly good Greek word, not there. You will also see translations that are side, who is at the Father's side, who makes God known. And that making God known, you'll also see as declare or reveal. The verb is actually ex ago. In other words, In Jesus, we now have we know God in ways we have never known God before, of intimacy and belonging and trust. And so the word here, translated as heart, is actually kolpos, which is bosom or breast. In other words, Jesus is reclining on the breast of God, the chest of God, the bosom of God. Okay, how close is that? That's close. And the only other time the word bosom is used in the entire Gospel of John is in 13:23 for the beloved disciple. When the beloved disciple is first introduced, who is never named, just the disciple whom Jesus loves, when he's first introduced in the Gospel of John, it's in 13:23. Now, this is one of the questions I have for John. You know, has anybody ever asked you, like, who do you want to have, when you get to heaven, or who would you want to have dinner with? John. Because I have a lot of questions. And one of them is, if Jesus loved the beloved disciples so much, where's he been for 13 chapters? Right? 13:23 is the first time he's introduced. And why not use his name, right? Yeah, I know credit, exactly. Why not use his name? So he's introduced, and this chapter 13 is the last time that Jesus has with his disciples before he's arrested. He's washed their feet, they'll share a meal together, and then 14, 15, 16, and 17 are called the farewell discourse, where Jesus is, saying farewell. So it's brilliantly called the farewell discourse. But it's when Jesus is saying goodbye. I am leaving you, but I will not leave you orphaned. I'm sending the Spirit. So in 13:23, we're introduced to the beloved disciple who is reclining on the breast of Jesus. And I think there's all kinds of theories of who the beloved disciple is. John the Baptist, Lazarus, John the author of John. I think it's us. I think it's us. We are supposed to imagine. That's where Jesus is wanting us to be, reclining on his very chest, his very breast, as you can see here. Just that's what the relationship, the closeness of the relationship, the intimacy of this relationship that Jesus is inviting all of us into. And particularly, we'll find out for the woman at the well, what is this relationship going to mean for her? And so that's then another theme that we're going to want to pay attention to. Now, before we get to chapter 4, we've got a couple other chapters. We've talked a little bit about chapter 1 in the prologue, and then after the prologue is the calling of the disciples in chapter 1, where Jesus is walking along. John the Baptist says, "Look, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Some of John's disciples start following Jesus. Jesus turns around and says, "What are you looking for?" And they say, "Where are you staying?" Odd, don't you think? Residence Inn, Homewood Suites. Where are you staying? The word there is, again, I want you to remember this, the word there is abide, meno. John loves this word. And it really is a synonym for belonging. Right? For relationship. To abide with God, to abide in Jesus is another way to describe this intimate relationship. And so Jesus then says, they say, "Where are you staying?" And Jesus, "Where are you abiding?" In other words, where can we be with you? And Jesus says, "Come and see." Well, we'll find out that the woman at the well says the exact same words. "Come and see," to her townspeople. And so witnessing is this invitation into this relationship, and going out and finding people to invite them into this relationship. And so the whole calling of the disciples is around this language of being found. Philip found Andrew. Andrew found Nathaniel. Jesus found. Everybody is finding everybody. And that in part is, again, why we will bring this forward to the woman at the well, because Jesus goes to Samaria to find her. Now, the verb is not used, but he is going to Samaria to find more disciples. Because there's this verse, you might have heard of it, John 3:16. Anybody? Yeah? Okay. For God so loved the world. Okay, well, how is God going to love the world if we don't go to the world and say, come and see? I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them in also, John 10:16. And so this narrative, this story of the woman at the well is almost like her call story, right? Jesus is calling her to be a disciple. And so he goes to Samaria to find her. Oh, I like this. This is, have you found Jesus? He's behind the curtain there. See, he's like, anyway. Yes, cartoons and religious, it's pretty funny. Huh? What?
Hiding them from the woman.
Yeah. But yes, we find Jesus, but for this story, this is Jesus finding you, Jesus finding the woman at the well, Jesus finding the disciples. What does it feel like to be found? And how is that abundant grace? And in fact, in John 9, when Jesus has healed the man born blind, and then there's that long conversation. They go to the neighbors. Is that really him? And they go to him, like, who healed you? He's like, this guy, Jesus. And then they go to the parents. Is this your son? Well, yeah, but, go ask him. Not the best parental moment in the Bible. But then finally, the Pharisees say to the man born blind, you were born utterly in sin, and you are trying to teach us, and they throw him out. Ekbalo him. Jesus, in this whole time, Jesus has healed the man, but has not been in the story until he finds out that the man was thrown out. When Jesus heard that they cast him out, Jesus found him. And then Jesus goes on to talk about, I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring, now this man is one of Jesus' sheep, brought into the fold of Jesus' community. So that's going to be another theme that we're going to want to pay attention to. Now remember, I promised that we would come back to this. The signs in the Gospel of John. I have been to Cana a couple of times, and you remember the story in chapter 2 of the wedding at Cana, where Jesus and his mother and the disciples are at a wedding. They've run out of wine. Jesus' mother says to him, they've run out of wine. Jesus says, well, Mom, they should have gotten a better wedding planner. Not my problem. And then Jesus' mother says, do whatever he tells you. And what results, of course, is this detail of 6 jars, 20 to 30 gallons each, filled to the brim. This is all in the text. Filled to the brim of the best wine when you least expect it. You serve the good wine, typically at the beginning of the wedding, which went on for about a week. Then, when the guests have had a lot, is when you bring out the Gallo jug or the Inglenook, or the box wine. You don't bring out the good wine, your $20, $30, $40 bottle of Chardonnay at the end. You bring it out at the beginning, the best wine. In fact, Jesus made so much wine out of water that you can still buy it in Cana. I have a bottle of Cana wedding wine in my wine rack. It's still possible. No, what is the point? This is the first sign that Jesus does. And these miracles or these signs that they're called in John, they're never called miracles. The wedding at Cana is unique to John. It's the very first thing that Jesus does in the Gospel of John. No healing, or there's no healing until later in chapter 4. The very first thing that Jesus does in the Gospel of John is turn water into wine. What are we supposed to believe about that? It's a sign. What do signs do? They point, right? They point you in a direction. So the signs themselves are not the point. It's what they point to. And they point to that Jesus is grace upon grace right here. And so the man who is healed in John 5, able to walk, he has not been able to walk for 38 years, which would have been his entire lifetime in ancient Palestine. And Jesus heals him. How long was the man blind? Since birth. And Jesus heals him. So all of the signs are abundant, grace upon grace. And then the last sign is the raising of Lazarus. How dead is Lazarus? Really, really dead. 4 days, okay? And he's going to be, as Martha says, he is going to stinketh, right? He's been dead 4 days, and that's significant because the Jews believe that the soul left the body after 3. So this is not a resuscitation. He is deader than dead in that tomb. And Jesus calls his name, Lazarus, come out. And so what does that sign point to? It points to when we are deader than dead in that tomb, Jesus is going to call your name. Joe, come out. And you will come out. And so that's grace upon grace. What does grace upon grace sound like when you hear your name called by your good shepherd? So all of this then leads to the fact that what Jesus is going to offer her is this abundance. Jesus is going to offer her this abundance that is that she's never had before. Now, the next thing we get is the temple incident, which you might be like, wait, one of these things is not like the other, because the temple incident has been moved. We'll talk about this more in a couple of weeks, but the temple incident is not at the end of Jesus' ministry in John, it's at the beginning. Because what we are going to see in a couple of weeks is that where is the temple? What is the temple of God? Not the physical temple anymore, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. So Jesus says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And then the Jewish leaders say, excuse me, we've been building this temple for 46 years, and you think you're going to raise it up in 3 days? He was speaking of the temple of his body. Okay? And so we're going to see that same thing for the woman at the well. Will she recognize that God is not in a temple somewhere, in her temple or the Jewish temple, but right in front of her? Couple other slides to get us ready for next week. Nicodemus is in chapter 3. And you know how that story goes. Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night, right? And I like to call him Nick at night. And so Nick at night, and they have this conversation, and it doesn't go very well. It lasts about, 9 verses before Nicodemus says, how can these things be? He takes Jesus very literally. Jesus says, you need to be born again. And he's like, what? You want me to go into my mother's womb and be born again? And that is, we'll see this with the woman at the well. She'll take Jesus really literally. You don't have a bucket. Where are you going to get this living water? But that encounter with Nicodemus sets up this verse, right? For God so loved the world. And so what does this mean? And this is another thing that we're going to talk about when we get to the next time I'm here, is that going to Samaria, going to the woman at the well, is really John 3:16 in a nutshell. It's almost as if Jesus is saying to his disciples, this is my paraphrase. I paraphrase a lot. You want to know what the world looks like? Oh, I'll show you what the world looks like. We're going to Samaria. Can you imagine the disciples' response? We're going where? Jesus, do you remember that Samaritans live in Samaria? That we don't have anything to do with the Samaritans? But no, Jesus says, you want to know what the world looks like? We're going to Samaria. I'm taking you to the world. That's what the world looks like. For God so loved the world is not a nice little plaque that you can put on your wall and say, oh, that's so nice, God loves the world. Oh, no. It means we are called to witness to that world. We are called to go into that world and come and see. So that's the next thing we'll want to pay attention to. Then look at this comparison between Nicodemus and the woman at the well, right? He is a male, female, has a name, no name. Religious leader, she's a religious outsider. The conversation with Nicodemus and Jesus takes place in Jerusalem during Passover. Conversation with the woman at the well in Sychar in Samaria by night. Her conversation is at noon. Right? There's conversation, there's some misunderstanding. Nicodemus ends up a little bit on the clueless side. Conversation, also misunderstanding, but it leads her to witness. So we're going to want to pay attention to what is happening in this conversation that gets her to this place of witness. And so when we read through John 4, 1 to 42, it is unique to John's gospel. It doesn't occur. This story does not occur in any of the other gospels. She's a unique character. And it is the longest conversation that Jesus has with anyone in the gospels. So we want to ask when we get there, what happens in this conversation with Jesus that leads her to go beyond what Nicodemus realized, to actually witnessing to her whole town? What is that conversation offering her? What is it bringing her and what is Jesus offering her that enables her, that allows her, that invites her to see herself in a new way as a witness, as a disciple? And then what does discipleship look like? So here are some questions. I might send these to you or to Connie that maybe you could disseminate or somehow. But here are some questions just to think about in the next couple of weeks, because you all are coming back, right? Yes. Okay, good. I hope I've set it up enough.
And they're bringing a friend.
And they're bringing a friend.
You have to explain what she just said
Yeah.
to your friend,
Yeah.
and then bring them with.
Yeah,
Okay.
come and see.
We've got it. Yeah.
Come and see. All right, exactly. So when you read through the woman at the well, and if you get to read that story, but a couple of questions to think about before we gather again, because there's some really interesting, shall we say, interpretations of her. So here's some questions. What do you know or remember about the woman at the well? What sermons have you heard, or what other studies have you heard about the woman at the well? What are some of your assumptions about her? Okay, what's some of the, because we have assumptions about certain stories, about what it means or what happens. What word or action do you primarily connect with discipleship? I mean, when you think about being a disciple of Jesus, what's the next word that you imagine? And how is it that we're going to be imagining discipleship perhaps in a little bit different way? And when was the last time you thought about what it means to follow Jesus? And since we're still in kind of the beginning of the year, February, right? Is there something you want to commit to in this new year about following Jesus, about being Jesus' disciple, something that you might want to adopt or something you might want to think about. And as we go through the story of the woman at the well, might there be something there that invites you to see both Jesus and yourself in maybe some new ways? Okay? So that's what we'll be up to. That sets up a lot. I'll remind us of these things when we get to next week, but we're going to be pulling from all of this morning as we walk through the story of the woman at the well. Again, if you're interested in a book, they're right here. And thanks so much, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.